Okay, here we go. My name is Jim Emick. I'm 68 years old. And this is a bit of my story with respect to spirituality and religion. I want to make it real clear right at the onset here that I'm in no way purporting to be some leader or guru or possessing some grand insight. This has nothing to do with me really, other than these are my perceptions, my conclusions through life, having been involved with a couple religions. And I thought that perhaps one or two people, if just one or two people saw this and thought that's kind of interesting, I have similar thoughts and ideas, and maybe they gained something from it, or maybe it, better said, assisted them along their paths, great. And that's really all it is. Maybe I can also add that, I don't know, I'm compelled to make these videos, so maybe there's more to it than that. But I guess it leaves a little bit of a milestone in case my family, my sons, or anybody wants to see what my thoughts were. We talk about these things all the time, so I don't think anything would be a surprise. But I'm getting older, 70 almost, and I have some current medical situations, and bodies don't last forever. So I thought I would just give a shot at these videos, but I'm not going to be putting them online or trying to make money or trying to have any kind of ego or look at me attitude at all. So we'll see if anybody benefits. We'll see if anybody even watches. So first, I'm going to start off with a look into my history. My business profession in life was management consulting. We help doctors, dentists, attorneys, any small office professionals learn how to manage their practices. We didn't manage them. We didn't tell them to do it our way. We simply tried to help them become better managers of their own situation. And I bring that up because very early on I learned that these doctors or these attorneys didn't want to listen to boring management rules and textbooks. Just didn't want anything to do with it. But what they did enjoy were stories of application, stories of what happened to other practitioners, other business owners, and then how one little idea or one management principle actually applied. So it was taking an idea and then seeing how it applied, listening to other people's stories. I think it created an ability to relate, and they liked that. They liked it quite a bit. So what I'm going to try to do is have some ideas in various religious and spiritual ideas, and then how I had to work through just the idea and how it might apply in my life. In fact, now that I even mentioned that, I guess I should also say up front that as I go along, if I use various names or I'll try to put them in context. As somebody that really loves Vedanta Hinduism, there are some names that'll come up. One is Sri Ramakrishna, and he is by some considered what's called an avatar or an actual incarnation of God, of pure spirituality. And he was around in the 1860s, 1880s. I think he died around 1883. But his life is very clearly chronicled because it's not based on some kind of historical artifacts or memories of thousands of years ago. It's pretty current. And the same with the great Swami Vivekananda, which was the first book I read as I pursued the religions of India, primarily Vedanta Hinduism and Buddhism. And Vivekananda passed away, I believe it was in 1903, 04, something like that. And he really was the one that brought India to America. So anyway, so let me just get those names right out of the way, right up front. So on spirituality, let's just go ahead and start it off. I started my spiritual path 50 years ago during college and the hippie eras. Ashrams, communes, eating peyote buttons. Gosh, there was a guy, what was his name? Carlos Castaneda back then. He wrote a bunch of books, and his path was eat peyote buttons and go out in the desert of California or something like that, if I remember, and people were wild with that in the 60s. But there were a lot of interesting deals. As a matter of fact, my college roommate was from the Del Mar area of Southern California, and he used to surf at a place called Swami's, which has to be right under the cliffs. I believe this is accurate. It was called Swami's because it was underneath a grand ashram, religious center by the great yogi Yogananda. And you might be familiar with his book. It was hugely popular, called The Autobiography of a Yogi. And I believe that's the book that Steve Jobs, maybe George Harrison too, it's chronicled that he gave that book out along with the books of Ramakrishna and Vivekananda to various people. I believe at the funerals too. But anyway, that was kind of where it all started. And my first personal religious group that I started with was in the mid-70s, around 1976. It was Hindu-Buddhist based, which is really what attracted to me. In fact, there was a book about Buddhism and this particular religion. Unfortunately, and it was fun in the first couple years. And over the years, though, it morphed into this dogmatic cult. And interestingly enough, a lot of the books that I've read recently being the last 10 years, discussing India, it talked about how to detect false gurus, because they're a dime a dozen, I guess, especially in India. Lots of people that, I guess you get off the airplane back in the 60s, people were looking for a guru. I remember the Beatles going there amongst other grand celebrities and singers and trying to, number one, find a guru, because that's what they were told they needed to do. I think the Maharishi was one of the great ones that traveled throughout the West. And in fact, they came to the University of California, Santa Barbara, where I went, and you could pay your $75 and get a mantra and learn to meditate. I didn't have enough money to get a mantra, so I just used the word Om, which I still use. It was given to me by God. But one of the ways to detect false gurus in all the writings I've read lately is once a group starts to pressure to donate, and I mean pressure, that's their whole game. They're tabulating the amount of money they have, and donation. When money becomes the issue, it's probably a scam and false, because I don't care if it has some good qualities. If they've really got a path that's good, it will attract people, and you don't have to pressure them, which is the second red flag of a cult, and that's the pressure to succumb to their bidding. And so the pressure for money, the pressure to succumb to their bidding, where you lose yourself and you lose your own integrity, well, you better figure out how to get out of there. As much as I was involved with that group, and as much as I have no interest at all anymore, if somebody wants to play that game, that's fine. I have it's an inside joke, but no fish to fry on that one. It's just not for me. It's just not for me at all. It did teach me it kind of opened the door, because it was based on Hindu Buddhism initially, that it opened the door to understanding the religions of India later on in life, and I'm forever grateful for that. And I did make some personal gains within it. That said, I also learned about dogma and how bad dogma is, and that there are literally billions of paths, and each path actually is just from within. But when somebody says this is the only way, I have a problem. And I also learned about sociopaths, which was a great lesson in life. So that was my first group. It lasted for a while, many years actually. In fact, I actually ran that group about 1980, 81, until I decided it was time to leave. So after a bit of time, I started to look at other ideas and other paths. I was very wary. I was not interested at all in joining anything after that last experience. But interestingly enough, one of my next steps was really to better understand my clients. I was in Maryland at the time, and a lot of my clients were Muslim, many were Jewish, all great people, and I had many Christian clients, as well as atheist. But my first book then, I said, I got to learn about everybody. I got to learn what people are doing. I was terribly ignorant. So I went and bought, believe it or not, The Idiot's Guide to Christianity. And in a way not expected, it changed my life. It did not have me, quote unquote, become a Christian. But I wanted to understand. And so I started to read it, and it was very hard. And it was hard because it exposed my difficulty in reading was because I had so many false ideas, so many fixed ideas, and negative ideas. And so I had to bore through all of that, and that was rough. Why I did, maybe that'll be answered by how this video evolves. But this was just another step, and another step that I needed. But a miracle occurred when I read that book, and it was about 2/3 of the way through, where it was literally an explosion of spirituality that opened up. And what it was is I couldn't separate out the various religions. I mean, I could, but they all became one. And I know that sounds pretty hippie, pretty out there, but I don't know how else to describe it. Many things in spirituality, you can't really put it in words. It's just a spiritual awareness. But this particular awareness was something that I found in Vedanta Hinduism, which was many paths, same end, or many paths, same God consciousness. That's like this major mantra in Vedanta Hinduism, and that is that all religions, well, first, all religions have their left and right-wing extremists, but their purity, each of us finds something that communicates to us, and all can provide something that helps us move forward. Even atheists, even nature, everything can funnel us and move us forward. And I thought that was the most incredible reaction to clearing up this reading Idiot's Guide to Christianity. It was fabulous. And I found that the years that follow, every time I hear about other religions, it just kind of funneled into this oneness. This, all have spirituality, all have some goodness. And a funny little story on that is my neighbor across the street, when I told her what had happened when I read, and she said, well, I want to learn something. She was brought up in a very spiritual family. Her mother was an anthropology professor at Cal Berkeley, if I remember that correctly. And she said, okay, I'll read that book, Idiot's Guide to Christianity. The next day she said, well, I kind of got sick too. It was very difficult, but I can't get through it. And she kind of jokingly gave me the book back. So there's just a lot of junk, emotion, fixed ideas stuck in religion. And I just started to ferret it out. And one of the great things that happened was dogma has no place in my life. And so I'll thank that religion that I was involved with in the 70s and 80s for teaching me how bad dogma is. I'm glad what happened when I read that book, Idiot's Guide to Christianity. It was fabulous. But I continued on with my search. I mean, this has been a 50 years, many lifetimes probably, but let's just count this time around, 50 years of looking and searching. I should, I guess, also say that I don't consider myself any religion. I maybe it's a cop-out to some, but to me, I'm all. I really go back to many paths. I went to my high school website, which I have a 50-year reunion coming up, and they asked for a little profile of you, and one of the questions was, what's your religion? And I just simply put, India. I love, number one, that I have the most love for is Vedanta Hinduism and Sri Ramakrishna. I call him Lord Ramakrishna, and Swami Vivekananda. I just love them. And I love Sri Lakshmi, and I love Sri Sarada Devi. I'm sorry if you don't know those names, I just had to throw that out there. But I don't want to identify really with anything. I just love the truth there. So how did I get there? Maybe that's the next story. And it is kind of funny because, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, I loved George Harrison, and I was listening to one of his great songs. They say it's one of the greatest songs ever, and it was My Sweet Lord. And interweaved in the end of that song is a mantra, and it's called the Hare Krishna mantra, I believe. And it's got, I don't know if it's Sanskrit or Hindi or what, but some words in there. And I got curious, and I started looking up what those things were. And I found out it was part of Lord Krishna, part of the Ramakrishna, Vedanta, and what was he involved with. And I just kept poking around, kept looking. It got me curious to see what a temple was, and I went online trying to find Buddhist and Hindu temples in the Sacramento area. I live in Folsom. And interestingly enough, there was only one that I saw at that time. I think there's more now, but there was one, and it was called the Vedanta Society of Sacramento, and it was a monastery, a Hindu monastery. So interesting, because I drove down there and I couldn't find it. It had this little bitty plaque. It was a 10-acre facility, a big garden. And it was hard to find, but I don't know what. There was this magnet that just pulled me in. And finally I saw their little sign. I drove in, and there's kind of nobody there. Later I found out that pretty much everybody just hangs out and does their studying and their meditation. But it was kind of set up similarly to what I was used to some 10, 20 years prior. And they had a bookstore, and they had an auditorium, and they had a library and a place to go study and learn. And so I wandered around, and their garden area had statues of various religious leaders, which again just startled me. I was stunned. So I went into their auditorium, which I now call their temple, and there, lo and behold, in the front were 5 big images. And it was Lord Buddha, it was Lord Jesus, it was Lord Ramakrishna and Sri Sarada Devi. Sarada Devi is the wife of Ramakrishna, and Swami Vivekananda. So here, these great avatars, saints. But I'm stunned. I mean, when do you walk into some place where all religions are good? How is this possible? So I ended up going back, and I went to a couple of their Sunday, I think they call them pujas, their worship services, and they're, again, thanking all the various religions and all the great saints, and I just adored it. I loved it. So I bought some books and I started to read, and one of the first things that came up, I've already mentioned, was Many Paths, Same End, Many Paths, Same God. Aligned to that was also Many Words, Same Truth. So all of this was speaking the same thing. In fact, a little thing I just want to mention that I wish I had the book to show you. I'd hold it up. But it's a fabulous book that you can get at any Vedanta center, but you can also get it on Amazon. And, well, anyway, it's called The Sermon on the Mount, as seen by Ramakrishna, or it might be as seen by Vedanta. And what it does is it has the Sermon on the Mount, the great sermon by Lord Jesus, and it has its various notes, or I don't know what words they would use, and I don't want to disrespect it, but it's sayings, which are called the Beatitudes, like be humble and don't hurt others, and just these beautiful, simple concepts. And over here on this side would be Ramakrishna and his words, and how each of these great principles were the same. Now, interestingly enough, when I read this book, whenever it was the Christian quotes, the words just, I don't know what it is I have difficulty with. Maybe it's similar to what happened when I read The Idiot's Guide, but when I read Ramakrishna, it's like honey. It's like butter porn. It's just the most beautiful thing. But what I learned from that was that there are many words, same truth. I love Christianity, but I learn more from the words of Ramakrishna or Vivekananda. But they're the same concepts. That's what I'm trying to get across. And I just thought that was the first book I read, and those were the first principles. Same word, same truth, many paths, same end. And I just thought that was beautiful. And coming from this cult-like, pressured atmosphere, and then for the next 10 years, when I would go and meditate or go to this temple, not once did somebody ask for money. Not once did somebody say, why aren't you a member? Do you want to be a member? Our numbers aren't high enough. None of it. They just let me move along. And as a little interesting note on that, about 6 months ago, I wrote the Swami and said, if you need any if there's any projects that you have, I'd love to donate. I had just helped with a painting project they had, and it made me feel good. To me, when I donate, I want to feel good for them allowing me to donate. Blah. If that communicates, I felt that it was an honor as opposed to being pressured to buy crap. Their books are amazingly inexpensive because they want to make it free, basically. I mean, to me, that makes total sense. If you've got the answers, shouldn't it, one, it should attract donations without trying, and two, don't you want to make it almost painless financially? There's books that I bought from them that, big old books. One's the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna in hardback, and I've seen groups that would charge $50 to $100 for that, and I think theirs was $12 or something. And it says that they're almost all published by an ashram in India. Anyway, boy, I'm getting a little bit wild on it, but I just think it's absolutely fantastic. So anyway, that became my home, my nesting ground. I love going there and meditating. A lot of it, Hindu and Buddhist are basically home-based religions in that you do them at home. But I love going there. It's the most quiet, peaceful place to go meditate. And since I have dogs and family and people, it's a little bit harder here. So I love going down there. It's 20 miles away, but I go there and I meditate, and I love it. I just absolutely love it. And in the same light, by the way, that I have hard time reading the Christian words, even though it's the same concept. Knowing this makes me love, or allows me to love, those religions, because I know that we're all on the same page. I know we're all on the same page. And the same thing with Buddhism, by the way, which initially was the religion that attracted so many of us in the 60s and 70s. I have a harder time reading those words, knowing, for example, that Buddha was a Hindu, and that these things are so linked. Some people say Vedanta Hinduism was the precursor to Buddhism. I don't want to get into arguments on that. I'm sure somebody will go, oh, you're crazy, Jim. Fine. So I just kind of wanted to give a little history on that. And really what I'm doing in the rest of this video, or maybe I'll separate it out into other videos, is reading and applying these various principles, which really, I have to say, they're coming from my heart because they're my application, but they're also, I was reading it in the various books, and it was kind of hard for me to get past a lot of the words and terminologies, and especially in Hinduism, there's millions and millions of gods and paths, and so I ended up with, this is what I do. And I don't know, maybe somebody will benefit from it. But I also wanted to get into one more. There's the many paths, same God, many words, same truth. And then there's one other pretty broad set of ideas that I want to mention that kind of leads into the rest. And that is that the idea, there are 4 principal paths talked about in the Bhagavad Gita, which is the Hindu Bible. And in there, now there's many religions, so in there, we have to really fully define, and I want to do this right now, define yoga. Because in the West, and maybe what I'm doing is breaking down here some of the fixed ideas of the religions of India. Because in the West, we tend to, I think, have fixed ideas, at least I did. You know, we tend to look at yoga as westernized yoga, doing poses and exercises and breathing in and out, and I think that's wonderful. No disrespect at all. I'm just saying that's really an aspect of one of the schools of yoga. So the real definition of yoga that we're using here comes from the derivation is from yoke, or to bind together. So you have 2 cows that are going to churn up the fields, and you yoke them together to do their work. Yoke meaning combined. And so in yoga, the various paths of yoga, which I'll describe, are talking or describing various paths to, however words you want to use, become one with God, or little s self becoming big S self, self-realization, how just to become one with all. Any of those things, whatever words work for you. But that's yoga. It's a path to, and there's many Indian words, whether you want to, samadhi, God, fine, find yours. Go read some things, figure it out. But I wanted to clarify that yoga, and that one of the transitions that really happened to me over this 10-year period was understanding these 4 key paths, and I'm just going to very quickly mention them. One is called Bhakti Yoga, Bhakti, and that's, you could say, is Lord Jesus, Lord Ramakrishna. There's many, many great swamis, that saints. And that's the love. Love God. Just be pure love. Be harmony, love. All those great things. I was just thinking about flower power of the 60s and 70s. Easier said than done. But that's what Ramakrishna's, he had two great revelations. One was that bhakti yoga is by far the easiest path to God, to self-realization. It took me a long time to understand or to even give it a try. And it makes me weep. It's the most beautiful, wonderful thing. Maybe that's why Christianity grew so quickly and so great. But that's bhakti yoga. And since I mentioned it, that Ramakrishna, the two great revelations was that bhakti is the easiest path, and number two, he was the one that spoke so much that all religions, many paths, same God. We have to embrace them all, that dogma has no part. So the second great path is karma yoga. It's a little bit different definition of karma. I mean, karma, I get the cause and effect viewpoint that we have on the West, but bad things, good things, our thoughts about the future, of the past, fixed ideas, all this junk piles up and it rolls with us into our future, and it pushes things around. And we are talking about how communities, cities, countries have their own karma in it, and it kind of guides and pushes and can make for some very difficult situations to deal with. But karma yoga is more how it's work. Karma yoga is how to live and work, and how that can be applied in life, because we all have to work, we all have to live, we all have to breathe. That's work. And so we can actually become spiritually enlightened and find God through work. That's quite a statement if you think about it, and it's the first several chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. It's so important to understand that path. And we all apply aspects of these various paths. And the next path is called Jnana, J-N-A-N-A. And Jnana yoga is kind of what my first religious experience was, and that's the path of knowledge. And you're kind of like working through all aspects of everything. I think they call it not this, not that. This is not spirit. This is not spirit. You know, the physical universe, and you're kind of breaking everything down. And boy, that's a kind of a grossly simplistic version. But the problem, Ramakrishna pointed out, is that as one gains knowledge, they can veer off into egotism. And egotism, by any religion, is the greatest barrier to self-realization. And I saw that in my earlier paths, where ego, it's just severely destructive. And what we're trying to do, you'll hear this later on, and meditation is give up little s self to get the bigger picture. And these things were communicated in earlier religions, but as soon as ego takes over, you're dead in the water. And so that's the difficulty. It's a great path, Jnana yoga, but it's extremely difficult. I thought that was really interesting. And boy, did I ever find that to be true. The other path, boy, I think it's called Raja yoga. I think that more, they call them the great yogis, you know, and in the West we might have this fixed idea of long hair and meditating for hours and hours and on end. That's just a path. And I believe those guys, the yogis, the great yogis, are learning to control and manage everything. And they do it through the body. They can manage, and I think these are the great yogis that we hear about that can move objects or transform their bodies or do things. I don't know anything about that. I've never been able to. I've never seen it. I've never seen anybody that could. I have had miracles in my life and some wild things happen, but I don't want to talk about that. I think we all have, but we just never recognized it. So those are these interesting and fabulous paths. And I just wanted to mention this. And in fact, now that I think about it, the next phase, maybe I'll go into it right now. How much time have we done? I don't know. Oh, 35 minutes. So maybe I'll just make that one video. And the next one will actually get into how I applied all these various principles, including principles from the religions that I looked at in the 70s and 80s to the various books I read. And so then it'll get into what is spiritual or religious discipline? How do we apply that in our lives? How do we apply spiritual discrimination? I mean, how do we get these things done? And that's what the next videos are going to be. I'll try to tell more stories and more personalization, but I think that's good for now. So that's video number 1. Thank you.